Dear guests, the next panel discussion is The Future of Europe Under New Economic and Geopolitical Challenges. Please take your seat while our speakers prepare for the panel.
Our session is about the future of Europe under new economic and geopolitical challenges. Let me say at the start that this session is dedicated to a late friend, Nikos Sigas, who was a good friend of the conference and of the subsequent society. Nikos was a strategy and innovation consultant and very active in conferencing and article writing and active in discussions. This is to his memory. For today's discussion, our panel, I'm pleased to say, is interesting and very well read into the subject. We have Oksana Antonenko, who is professor at EUI, the European University Institute in Florence. Oksana focuses on geoeconomics and strategy, and also does geopolitical risk advisor. André Sapir is an economist, a Pechian economist, and senior fellow at Bruegel. Bruegel is the European economist think tank, and also professor at the University of Brussels, Université libre, Bruxelles. Okay. Thank you both for being here with us today. So let's dive into the subjects. We'll cover main points in the discussion, and then we'll open for questions. So we live in times that are interesting, which means cursed by Chinese culture. We have an old order that is being demolished in some way or changing drastically, and a new one that's not being born yet, but is in the making of coming. The fundamental changes that drive this new geopolitical change is, number one, the rise of China in the last 20, 30 years, the war in Ukraine, and Russia's resurgence in some way. We have the reform, we have the return of great power politics in the global setting, the end of America's unipolar moment, which lasted quite a while. And of course, you have technologies which are changing the way we do things and the way we fight wars. So in this session, we're going to examine how Europe fits into all this and how it can respond to its main challenges and remain relevant and have influence. So before we get to the European context, we start asking the question of how the rise of China and how the war in Ukraine impacts on this global system and order that that we're going through now. And I'll ask first Oksana to comment, and then André subsequently. Oksana?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's really a great pleasure to be here, particularly on the eve of Cyprus presiding in the European Council in the beginning of next year. So it's really interesting to hear, also being at the conference, what is the thinking in Brussels about the future of Europe. So it's a very timely discussion. To answer those questions, which of course are very big ones and very hard to answer very succinctly, I would just start by maybe qualifying a little bit what you said at the beginning, Ioannis, that we had a global liberal order. In fact, I think the liberal order has never been truly global. It's been part of the West and the kind of the North, but there was a very big part of the world which existed somewhat outside of this liberal order. Now we see the new world in which the liberal order still remains, at least within the European Union. We are very much the last bastion to some extent of this liberal international order. But there are many other orders that are emerging. So we are kind of moving in a world where there will be several orders coexisting with each other, and the relationship between them is going to be defined not by the rules at the moment, but by different factors, such as balance of power, such as balance of economic power, military power, such as changes in the domestic political trends. We see in particular, for example, the United States. I also agree with you that the transition to this poly-order world is going to be a very long one, and as we know from history, fraught with conflict. And one conflict that we've been talking about here is the war, Russia's war against Ukraine, which now has entering the 13th year. We have to remember that this war has started in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, and the full-scale, of course, invasion started in 2022. This war is testing not only Ukrainians' resilience and bravery, but now increasingly testing Europe's own ability to deal with its security. As we have seen in the last several days, the spillovers from this war are increasingly visible, not just in Ukraine itself or the countries next to Ukraine, such as, for example, Poland, where we have seen recently the drone and missile flying in its territory, but now increasingly further afield. Just the last couple of days, we've seen drones appearing everywhere from Denmark to Germany. A lot of concerns about what is happening in Baltic Sea with the undersea cables, which some of them have already been sabotaged, and the hybrid and cyber warfare, which is happening on a daily basis. So we are in a situation where this war, this conflict, is now increasingly engulfing Europe as a whole. So I'm going to say a few more words, I think, in our discussion, what I think Europe is already doing and should be doing about it.
Okay, thank you, Oksana.
Thanks. Let me also thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak at this forum and see good old friends like Michael. Now, let me say that I agree with everything that has been said, but I want to add a twist. So not challenge what has been said, but add a twist. I would say that for us Europeans, what is happening with China, what is happening with Russia, is something that mentally we were prepared for. What we were not prepared for is the United States. So this is what I think this moment is about, in my view. Russia, we will talk, and including military. Personally, I think that it's a problem that we will be able to. We are not able now to deal with, but it's something that it's within our reach. It's a tall order, but it's within our reach. China is a partner. China is an important partner, but China was never a close ally. So the relationship that we have with China, as the relationship that we have with Russia, is sort of transactional. Even for us Europeans, it was transactional. The relationship with the United States was not a transactional, is not a transactional relationship. And when your closest friend and closest economic partner in every dimension, because those numbers that are always given, 20% of trade, 20% of our exports go to the US. In fact, our intertwinement with the US is far more than that. Foreign direct investment is 40%. 40% of our foreign direct investment is in the US. 40% of US foreign direct investment is in the EU. The dollar, the technology, all of those matters, what was spoken by the gentleman before about the crypto assets. Okay, I was surprised that he did not mention the US, because the big change today is not about competitiveness, and it's about now our security, right? Are we relying on sort of crypto assets or every financial dimension from the US? Is that something that we want to continue, or do we want to have some autonomy? So we're asking ourselves not so much, yes, there was the problem of autonomy vis-a-vis the Russian oil. Yes, there is the problem of autonomy vis-a-vis the critical raw material from China. But now we have to ask ourselves autonomy vis-a-vis our closest economic partner. That is a completely new dimension. And there is not agreement, in fact, in Europe on that. I mean, it's a question. Naturally, there's no agreement, because when we have been so close partner for so long, and then suddenly there is this question mark, and we hear Mr. Trump, we hear Mr. Vance. Well, we wonder, is this something just for the next 2 years? And then, personally, I would not assume that, in 2 years, the world goes back to the previous world, right? The benevolent hegemon. No, we are in a coercive hegemon So you were talking, we never had a global order. Okay, we had the order of the West. But within the order of the West, the US was the hegemon. And we accepted that hegemon. It was a benevolent hegemon and was very good to us. Right? That's what allowed us to do, including European integration. But now we ask ourselves, hey, wait a second, is the US entered into a different phase? And what does it mean for us? And then how does it mean on how we deal with China and with Russia? So we have to look through the prism of the United States, and I think this is the moment. This is the moment of questioning. I'm not saying that I have the answer, but I think this is the question. This is the heart of the question at the moment, is the EU-US relationship. Obviously, we're in the middle of a war. Obviously, NATO is a very, very important partner, and we need the involvement of the US. But is the US there not simply to provide us arms that we are buying from for Ukraine? Is that a supplier of arms? Okay, there's a big sort of shop. You know, you can buy arms from here. Is that what is our security arrangement? Is it something else? So this is a very, very difficult question for all of us who have been trained in the United States, PhD in the US. I'm married in the United States. You know, and many of us, of our elites, have been raised in that manner. So intellectually, it's much tougher, it seems to me, than dealing with China and with Russia, for which we are better mentally prepared.
Can I just quickly also qualify to say we just did an opinion poll in cooperation with YouGov and EUI, asking Europeans among all member states what they think about the biggest threats. Of course, Russia comes up first, with about 40% of Europeans think that Russian power is a risk, and now United States this year comes second, with more than 20% of Europeans thinking that United States power represents the greatest risk. So exactly what you said, it is not just the politicians, it's the public increasingly. And of course, if you live in, you know, another interesting thing from this poll was that those people who are concerned about rising risk from United States are more likely to support more investment in Ukraine. It's also very interesting. So as a result, we've seen for a number of years the war fatigue among the European publics was setting in. The support for Ukraine was slightly falling. But this year, for the first time, it stabilized. And we looked at the polls, and the polls indicate that it stabilized precisely from those people who say that they're concerned about the rise of US power, because they understand that Europe is on its own, it needs to ensure its own security.
Okay, so it seems that Europe is between three giants and being squeezed at the same time: the United States, China, and Russia. And the United States is now becoming, perhaps we call it an extractive hegemon against its own friends, demanding things that are extractive to fund the empire. So from that perspective, Europe between being squeezed in this way, the starting point in Europe is quite worrisome. We have lacking productivity, we have lacking innovation, or like innovation gap, stagnant growth more or less compared to the United States. We have a mercantilist orientation in our trade, and that's bad when the world turns protective. And to have financial distress in some senses in terms of the high debt and funding it and sustaining it. So with this background, what's the assessment? How do we fare in this great power competition and the squeeze we're feeling from all these three giants? André, can you take this?
So I think the picture that you have just drawn, I think is a correct picture. To tell you the very truth, when Mr. Trump in April, at the beginning of April, announced the reciprocal tariffs that were implemented a bit later, the famous announcement on the so-called Liberation Day, my disappointment, if I look at or answer to the US, my disappointment was not that we did not announce immediately that we are going to take measures in kind. This is what you are putting to us, this is what we are, some China style. I knew that this was not going to come. So I was not disappointed by it, because I knew that we were not in a position economically and for security reasons because of Ukraine to do this. So when I spoke to my friend and those who were arguing, this is, you know, we need to show that we are a big market, right? We are a big market and we are going to respond in kind. I knew that we were not up to it. No, what was I hoping for? I was hoping for, the next day, I was hoping that there would be a European Council meeting, heads of states, saying that, hey, by the way, we have a Draghi report about competitiveness. We have a Letta report. We are lucky that they were there for a few months. The Commission has endorsed that as its roadmap, essentially the competitiveness. No, let's have a European Council meeting to say we are accelerating the process. That should have been, to me, that should have been our response. And still, what I believe is our response. So our response is not our response is to shape up our own economy. And you know, when I look at the Draghi report, okay, I think there's lots of good stuff. One can obviously quibble with point A or point B or point C, but in a sense, the Draghi report, and quite understandably, it's a response to the Biden administration. That's what it is. You remember the investment, what was it, IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, right? And which was sort of a green plan, essentially, right? So the Draghi report is green and competitiveness. It's responding to the US that has taken the lead also on innovation together with China. What we need now is a Draghi report, or updating the Draghi report for the United States, okay, for that kind of challenge. So again, we need to upgrade our mental thinking about make a correct assessment of what is the world. So I think the competitiveness agenda is still there. It's fundamental. But we need to add to that competitiveness agenda this issue of autonomy. And the autonomy, I'm afraid to say, is in many of the dimensions, because that's where we are so dependent about the US. So it's not sort of autonomy vis-à-vis China. That's relatively easy, in my view. It's vis-à-vis the US. Again, the US is not our enemy, but we need to be more autonomous. We need to be in a position to act not under coercion from the US. So yes, I think an economic agenda with a number of dimensions, including on the military, all the issues of single market, military, financial services, energy very much a problem for Europe. By the way, on energy, I think looking with the benefit of hindsight, in Europe, and member states level, also companies, we made a mistake to be too much invested in energy intensive industries. Okay, we are energy poor. So we teach to our students sort of economics 101. What is your comparative advantage? Specialize in your comparative advantage. Is our comparative advantage to specialize in energy-intensive activities when we don't have energy? And energy is always going to be expensive relatively to other parts of the world. So this was a mistake. No, but now we are heavily invested there. So there's a strategic question. What do we do? Are we abandoning all of this? What's happening with the chemical industry in Europe? What's happening with the chemical industry in Germany? All of those. What does it mean? So I think we need sort of strategic thinking about our economic model. So one is because of what's happening geopolitically. We need competitiveness, but retooling our model is not very, very easy. One last point on that. Look at the car industry. One question mark that I have for myself, and I hope that the answer will be a positive one. If you look at the two big producers of electric car in the world, one is an American, the other one Chinese, or China, there are many, but let's say there is one dominant one. They are new companies. They were born as electric car. They were not gas guzzlers that transform themselves, they were born as No, are we going to be able to transform? This is what we are trying to do, right? Are we able to transform Volkswagen to be a leader in electric? Is that possible? Is that feasible? If you look at IBM, IBM did not adjust to the new age to become a laptop, and so I think this is a big challenge. We have a big challenge, and partly for those reasons. So it requires a lot of strategic thinking, and at the moment we are acting a little bit on a piecemeal basis. But new competitiveness in this world, it's absolutely essential. This is what will give us our autonomy, by being more competitive, essentially, but competitive in this world also where you need to worry about autonomy.
Thank you, André. I want to move to energy and defense. I'll let you have a comment, brief one, briefly.
Yes, okay. I think briefly to say that I totally agree we need strategic thinking, but I would even say more urgently we need practical doing. I think the Draghi report has been on the table for a while. Letta report, I mean, I would add to that Niniste report, which from my point of view about the resilience of European societies and political systems is as important as the competitiveness. They were on the table for a while. If you look what actually in practice was achieved and implemented, very little. And now we are in an accelerated pace when we need to combine strategic thinking, flexibility, because the change will come very quickly, with rapid implementation. And if we judge by what happened yesterday in Copenhagen at the meeting, where that coming on the back of drone attacks that happened just days before, we were all expecting that there will be a decision. But even in that condition of pressure, stress, crisis, at 27, we still have fundamental disagreements. And I think the big question is, how do we change the system? How do we reform the governance within the European institutions, which will make us agile and able to implement some of those, competitiveness, defense, etc., other plans and strategies rapidly? Because if we sit on them, that's not going to work. The world is changing too rapidly. That's a few words.
Thank you, Oksana. All right, go back to perhaps Biden and Trump, IRA and Trump's today's trade agreements. There's a common thing. They are both still European industry. Biden by incentive, Trump by directive, dictating us that we should invest an X amount of money into the United States. Industry will leave. So going now to the issue of the Draghi report and what it means, the diagnosis I think is well accepted. It's a valid reading of the situation. In terms of implementing it, it can be quite difficult, and even because everything that is mentioned as a remedy, as a policy, requires energy. Right? If we are going to close the innovation gap, if we're going to integrate AI with our industry, if we're going to do defense, right, we need a lot of steel and a lot of electricity and a lot of energy, which is not there. And Europe is the poorest power when it comes to energy. All is imported by 80%. So we depend on somebody, and it's now somebody that supplies energy to us. It's expensive, and we lose competitiveness. So combining the energy conundrum in the European Union and our defense requirements today, right, the two go together. And defense has another special side to it, in the sense that to be able to fund our defense spending in the next 5-10 years, we need to cut down on welfare state. And European Union is identified as a union of welfare state. If you take that away, there would be lots of populist revolts, and it might put the entire European project at risk.
Social market economy.
Yeah. So I'd like your comments on these two areas. Let's start with Oksana and then go to André.
Okay, I think this dilemma, this rhetoric that we are having guns versus butter debate, I actually think that it's completely missing the point. Because, the only way we can afford in the long run to have a welfare state we have at the moment is precisely what André said, is to find our new industrial strategy. And, investing more in defense is in the current environment a new industrial strategy. So that would create a foundation for us to be able to sustain the welfare state in the future. The second point to make is that, the way that the rules are changing now with additional borrowing, the additional grants from the European Commission, we actually are able to invest in defense without taking money away from the social obligations. And the third point to make is that, of course, we are in a situation now where defense is not just about, tanks and whatever, digging trenches, but it's about the age of innovation. If you look what is happening in Ukraine now, every 2 weeks, there is some fundamental change in the way that the warfare is fought on a technological side. So the new AI implemented, the new drones, everything. So Europe, investing in defense really means also to catch up, with a technological edge. So I think for me, it is not really a contradiction at all. And one point on energy, I think we did go through the very, shocking crisis in 2022 when the energy, particularly, gas prices have gone over the roof, and we all know the story, the inflation, etc. We're now luckily entering in a period where actually oil and gas prices are expected to stabilize and even fall, although I know predicting oil prices is not a very good thing for an expert, but at least if we look at what is happening, OPEC is now relaxing their production targets. We're seeing a lot of new LNG coming on stream in the next 3 years from Qatar, from the United States. We have infrastructure now, we invested in Europe to accept more LNG. So there is no expectation that we will be facing a very fundamental increase unless we have a big war in Europe or bigger war in Europe. That, of course, can change fundamentally where we are. But therefore, we need strong defenses, and we need to ensure that this doesn't happen. But if we are on the current trajectory, I think at least combination of green economy transition and the expected low prices can give us some breather.
Okay.
So, again, I agree with what has been said. Don't want to change anything. Maybe add two elements. One, a positive one, and one is a negative one. I'll start with the positive. The positive is that, and this is not trivial, but needs to be done in areas like defense, like energy. Where we do need to make investments, and investments of the sort that was just put forward with a lot of innovation element. I completely agree. We need to spend our money better. So I think one of the problems that many people have identified, and Draghi very much so, he has a whole chapter. If I don't know who has read the Draghi report in its second volume, because I've noticed that very few people have read the Draghi report. People have read sort of summaries of the Draghi report at best. Maybe they've read the first part, the part A, which is itself a summary, or they've read summaries of that. But I meet very few people who have read part B, which is the long part, which is actually an interesting analysis of many sectors and many issues. And there is one chapter about defense industry, and he explains very clearly, I think what most economists would agree, is that we're in a highly fragmented market in Europe, okay? So we are back to sort of the single market, okay? Single market for defense is outside of the treaty. But no, when you look at the economics, it's clear that if we are going to increase our spending, the only way that we reconcile the fact that we have already high debt levels, and we don't want to make the choice between guns and butter, and if we need to spend more money on defense, we need to spend better the money that we already spent. And there is a lot of improvement that can be done. So in a sense, that's the positive part. In a sense, it's the easy. There is slack, okay? And this is what allows us, in principle, to reduce this issue of trade-off, because there is the slack. Nonetheless, and this is the negative. I think what we want to do in Europe, and I personally support that, is sort of the issuance of common debt, as we did during the COVID crisis, which was a very big innovation. I didn't think that the Union was going to be able to do it, and it did issue. Now, can we repeat that for a similar urgency, which is in defense? I think a difficulty that we have is that simply to take the two largest countries, and then you can take others in the European Union, Germany and France, their public finance situation is very, very different. Okay? When we all entered, Cyprus a bit later, but when we all entered in the euro in '99, France and Germany had the debt to GDP ratio of 60%, both of them. In a sense, that's why the 60% was selected. Okay, it was not just a number pulled out of the thin air. This was what the two main countries had. Okay, and it's a figure that makes sense with the 3%, the growth rate and all of those. Okay, 60%. Now, fast forward to 2025, Germany is still around 60%, about 65, but France has gone now to double, nearly 120%, even overtaking my country, Belgium, which was always a higher debt. And so the discussion in Germany of having common debt, what you hear in the German papers, and not only in Bild-Zeitung, not that I would underestimate Bild-Zeitung on its impact on public opinion, but even in FAZ, you say, why should we, the Germans, with low debt, take over the debt of the French and the other usual suspects, okay? But now France has changed camp. France was sort of in the core group with sort of low debt. Now France has moved to the other. And so this issue of the common debt, however much it is needed, and it makes sense from a political viewpoint, it's not. So it's not just obviously the usual suspects of Netherlands and Finland, which are there, and but in Germany, and given that Germany itself is making big investment and big decision at the national level and has the room for maneuver, then you are asking the Germans also to go into those common debts, which makes sense. And obviously, it's a common problem. So from that viewpoint, you can make the argument. No, obviously, is not defense a problem that we all share in common and all of that? Yes, sure, it is. But then when it comes to financing it, it's a different matter. So this is my negative element. We should not underestimate the political situation. And don't forget that in Germany, in the latest polls, AfD polled #1. So when you are going to make the common debt with Germany, AfD immediately going to say, this is Europe. This is Europe. It's us, the Germans, paying for the others. So it's not going to be a trivial matter from a political viewpoint. So it needs a lot of political economy and strategic thinking for the kind of situation we are in today. We don't have only Trump outside. We have also Trump kind movement inside the EU. To me, this is the most frightening element of Trump, by the way. It's not the trade, it's not those other issues. It's undermining our own system and making common decisions very, very difficult.
Okay. Thank you, André. A few minutes left. I'll invite questions from the audience. Michael?
I'd like to thank you and build on the fact that we introduced in the United States in the equation. And I'd like to say the following. Of course, tariffs are important, innovation is important, but we're looking at the United States also as the place where democratic values were held in very high esteem. Now, in modern dictators, they don't wear military uniforms or dark glasses, so you really have to look for them. And I think what is happening now in the United States is very worrisome, not only for the United States, but the flirting that the administration does with European countries that are prone to questioning democratic values. And I think what Europe has done until now is to flatter a vain man and try to outsmart a not very intelligent man. For the short run, it works. But I think we need to ask the question now. It is not a matter, André, of strategic thinking or even homework. It's a matter of leadership. And I'd like to ask you, as you look at Europe and the position they have taken on a number of issues, at the level of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, at the level of the President of the Commission, do we have the people in place that will help us work through this quandrum? And if not, we're not going to write more reports. We can have a modern Draghi report on these issues that is going to be on a nice shelf, and then we will still be in the same situation.
Okay, comments from over here?
Sure. Please go ahead.
No, it was a question to you. I can add later on.
Look, I'm not going to comment on individuals. I'm not going to say something about Mrs. von der Leyen, about Macron, and about the leader in Germany. But I agree that the issue ultimately is one of leadership, and is one of still making the correct analysis. I would say that in general, in the last few years, I think the analysis that Macron, and I will say immediately I'm disappointed of what has happened, but Macron has made the right analysis right from the start. His famous speech at the Sorbonne a few months after he was elected about Europe, I think he's made the right analysis. Unfortunately, his position domestically has been weakened. So to be a strong leader in Europe without a national leader, without having the national base, is not ideal. If you compare that to the time when Mitterrand and Kohl were leaders together with Delors, this was a formidable trio because you have Delors in Brussels and the leadership together with a strong German leader and a strong French leader. So I'm afraid that now we have to wait for the next French election. And we have to hope that the French election do not turn out badly. Because indeed, there is all the time disinformation campaign coming from Russia, coming also from some cronies of Trump, so we have to be worried about that. I was very happy to see that the Commission played, I think, a very useful, very good role in the recent election in Romania. I was very worried about this election in Romania. Could have been quite a disaster. Remember what had happened before with all the disinformation. Brussels helped a lot in sort of financing knowledge about the disinformation. They put a lot of resources, and they were right to do that. They did that below the radar screen, but they did it in very, very good manner. So at least you have to have the understanding of what's going on. But leadership is something that doesn't grow on tree. That's clear.
You know, I have a slightly different maybe answer to say that I actually believe that what Europe at the moment needs is more of what Europe does best. Slowly, but firmly moving in the right direction for more regulation, more kind of, you know, consensus building. Unfortunately, it is a slow pace, but it is much more irreversible than if you have decisions dependent on one leader or the other. And if we talk about leadership, I mean, I don't know, look at Ukraine. Who would have thought that Zelensky is going to be a leader who could stood up to Putin in a war? You know, that's actually one of the calculations, I guess, that Putin made why to attack at that time, because he looked at Zelensky and he thought, oh, you know, comedian, you know, how can he really, and he turned out to be really the most extraordinary leader of our times. I think he will be in the history books, that's for sure. So in a sense, you know, leadership really manifests itself oftentimes in crisis, you know. So I like to quote, you know, Trotsky, who used to say, you might not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And we are now in that situation in Europe, precisely, that the more kind of critical the situation become, the more we will see people, hopefully, standing up to this. But as I said, you know, Cyprus will have a very challenging task, because a lot of those crises will come to the fore here next 6 months. And Cyprus will be hosting those meetings, and we'll be trying to, bring about the consensus among these different leaders, potentially. Not only Romania, what about elections in Czechia, where Babic is about to take power and join this club of Orban and Fico in Slovakia. So it's going to be a challenging task, but I still believe that what Europe needs to do is to be firm about institutions, exactly as you say, for example, in defense, make sure that we do not have national procurement only, but we pool resources to procure jointly, to create the rules, to invest jointly, because that is really eventually what our strength is as the European Union.
Thank you both very much, André and Oksana. Thank you all for participating. And thank you to the organizers.